where are the radio stations talking about high schools? I went to a school with about 2,000 kids in Dayton. So when I got on the air as a freshman, that was a very big deal. I was suddenly as big in school as any of the jocks who played football. That equalized me in the eyes of young girls with them because, hey, you know, these guys play football and clobber each other, but Chuck is famous. He's on wing. And what a wonderful time to be alive.
Welcome once again to the Talking Archive, and our conversation concludes now with Chuck McKibben, voiceover talent, teacher, and the author of the book Mel Blanc, The Voice of Bugs Bunny, ... and me, inside the studio with Hollywood's Man of 1,000 Voices.
I lived the life of a disc jockey during, I think, one of its greatest periods, when we had the Beatles. Oh my God, the Summer of Love, 1967 was the Beatles.
Oh yeah. The
Beach Boys, the psychedelic music, the Flo and Eddie doing Happy Together.
Oh yeah.
The psychedelic sounds of incense and peppermints.
The Strawberry Alarm Clock, yeah. And then you also have the Temptations getting into the funk
and
psychedelic.
And now you got the black
9.
performers too, and they were phenomenal.
They're awesome. Like Jimi Hendrix, Monterey Pop Festival really changed the world overnight. And that's how Freeform FM came in Los Angeles and San Francisco, because he had two DJs, B. Mitchell Reed down in Southern California. He was even on 57 WMCA back in the 60s. He went on WMCA because he thought that was a crime that 1010 Winds got rid of Alan Freed and put Murray the K. So he says, I'm going to New York to beat Murray the K. He did, and then he came back to Southern California. But by 67, he was still on KFWB Channel 98, which by that point was chicken rock, pretty much. It wasn't top 40.
Yeah.
But he met Big Day Tom Donahue, who has been at the KYA station up in San Francisco, which was the top 40 station, the boss of the Bay. And so they got together talking, saying they were tired of the rigidity of top 40 radio. And they said, let's do some freeform stations. And so they found an FM in LA, KPPC 106.7, which was owned by the Pasadena Presbyterian Church, which also owned an AM signal, but they wanted some separate programming on the FM. So Big Daddy bought the time on KPPC, and eventually it became an all freeform station probably about a year later. And then up in San Francisco, you had KMPX, which Big Daddy also did. And then eventually there was a strike, and so Big Daddy went to KSAN, and then B. Mitchell Reed went to KMET, the Mighty Met. A little bit of Heaven 94.7 Tweedledee. And that was like...
You got all this stored in your brain.
Yeah. But it was FM was this canvas that, a blank canvas to create new stuff.
Let's write something interesting on it, yes.
It was. And ABC had the Love Radio Network with Brother John Rydgren, who had the voice of God. Hi, this is Brother John Rydgren right over here. I actually met Brother John's son, John Rydgren, who has the same name. And Brother John passed away in the late 80s, but John Rydgren Jr., it's actually Junior, but I'll just say Junior just for the sake of it. He is doing voiceover himself, and he was like one of the finalists to be the new voice of Tony the Tiger when Thurl Ravenscroft died. Instead, it went to Lee Marshall, who's since passed away. But another one I worked with was Ed McKeon. He was another finalist to be the voice of Tony the Tiger, and Ed's interviews on my show as well. So, so just all these great talents and great music.
It was a glorious time to be on the radio.
Like you said with Mel Blanc, just 4 tracks. The Beatles, if you ever saw the making of Sgt. Pepper, all they had was 4 tracks. But what they were able to do with those 4 tracks, when George Martin played the master reels, tracks 1 and 2, vocals and drums. Track number 3, the wind-up carousel. Track number 4, the circus sound effects for the benefit of Mr. Kime.
I'm very appreciative to Paul McCartney for doing so many videos, giving us background about those days and how things were done. He's been wonderful about sharing the history behind the scenes of the Beatles, and I think he's still a phenomenal performer. I like some of his lesser-known songs. I loved Coming Up.
Oh, that's great video. Where he's dressed like Buddy Holly, dressed like early 60s
video,
Paul,
really.
the Let It Be Paul.
But here's the thing. Unfortunately, because I was only on the East Coast, I missed all the radio history of Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And all I saw of it was the Beach Party movies, which I thought were great, But the problem of knowing about radio in those days was we didn't have an internet. And you couldn't just tune in KHJ to hear, the real Don Steele or anything like that. I did see, I think Randy might have been the publisher of it, a list of what these guys made back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little shocked. $26,000? Really? To be a huge disc jockey in Southern California? But we're talking about 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And like I said, my pay would be a joke today at Mel Blanc's, but it would be a moderate living today by today's value of the buck.
I heard that the real Don Steele, the last couple of years of his life, he made $300,000 a year, working for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week at KRF 101. Right. He even joked to world famous Tom Murphy, "I'm probably Southern California's most expensive board operator." And but with Don, LA had 3 great top 40 stations in the 60s. The first one was KFWB Channel 98, which debuted in January 1958, Color Radio. You also had KEWB San Francisco, Channel 91, and then KDWB in Minneapolis. Those were the 3 Kroll Collier stations. And KFWB had a great lineup. They had Gary Owens was on there, Wink Martindale. You had Elliott Field, who was there for the entire time. He looked kind of like Casey Kasem if you saw his picture. And then you had B. Mitchell Reed. And Reed had actually begun on KFWB in 1956 when it was still full service. He hosted a jazz show called The Boy on the Couch. So when he was told you're going to be playing rock and roll, he was very reluctant. But he thought, you know what, let me give it a shot. And he ended up becoming a rock and roll radio pioneer. Later on, you had Sam Riddle on KFWB before he went to KHJ. You had later on, you had Loman and Barkley, Emperor Hudson. And then KRLA had great DJs like Bob Eubanks, Casey Kasem, Charlie O'Donnell, Dave Hull, the Hullabalooer, Emperor Hudson. Bob Eubanks did a show called the Teen Toppers, where every night they'd salute a different high school and what their top 60 favorite songs were. And all 60 of those songs got played. So it gave you something to look forward to each night. Like, oh my gosh, what school's going to be saluted and what are their favorite songs? You wouldn't have anything like that today.
Where are the radio stations talking about high schools?
Yeah.
I mean, that was big. I went to a school with about 2,000 kids in Dayton. So when I got on the air as a freshman, that was a very big deal. I was suddenly as big in school as any of the jocks who played football. And that equalized me in the eyes of young girls with them because, hey, these guys play football and clobber each other, but Chuck is famous. He's on wing. And what a wonderful time to be alive. Geez, I was so darn lucky. And, when I say so lucky, I was also fortunate enough to write to and get a response from the voice of the movies, Don LaFontaine. Don LaFontaine had been on Long Island where he started, and he was working. Here's a Don LaFontaine story, all true. He worked in the Walt Whitman Mall selling wines and liquor in the liquor store there on Route 110 in Long Island. I am very familiar with that because I also worked on Route 110 in Long Island for my second ad agency, the biggest on the island out of about 60. And so LaFontaine was doing cheap trailers for bad movies in New York on a per diem basis. Go into the city, take a day off from the wine shop, and go in and produce a movie trailer for something like Gunfight at El Diablo. And that day, his voice guy doesn't show up. So Don needs a scratch track to play for the execs who are going to come in and see what he's put together. So he goes on mic, does a scratch track. They come in, and this is a true story, and they say, "Wow, you're really good. We didn't know you did voiceovers." He said something like, "Well, I don't. I just, my guy didn't make the call, and he'll be in tomorrow to replace the voice." He said, "Don't. You're great. You got to join SEG because we're going to use you, and we're going to use you again. And by the way, if you lived in Hollywood, we could use you all the time on big movies." And that's kind of how it started. He later went to Philadelphia, started a little production company. But they kept saying, if you were here, you'd be a millionaire because we'd use you on everything, which was absolutely true, of course. So Don had a veterinarian in Long Island whose son studied voiceover with me. His name was Bob Cucaro, I think. And I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, but Bob was a real nice kid. He was very young. And he said, oh, I know Don. I've been at his house. I met his beautiful daughters. What? You know Don LaFontaine? He says, yeah, my dad's his vet, or was when he was on Long Island. He said, so you've been invited to his house in Southern California? He said, oh, yeah, it's a palace. What? He said, can I contact this guy? He said, sure. I'll give his email, his personal email. I did. He wrote me back a full-page letter, this dear, sweet, wonderful man. I understood then why everybody, even his worst competitors, loved Don LaFontaine. He was so humble. He said, and I repeat this for public knowledge, he said, every step of my life has been guided by a higher power. Well, I kind of felt that way about being in Southern California and meeting Rod Tebow. I didn't know he was there. I had no way of knowing he was there, but he's the man who connected me to the great man and got me to the point where I never needed a resume ever again in my life. All I had to do was show the letter of recommendation from Mel on his letterhead, where he talked about how I worked with all these dozens of great stars. And from that point on, people would say, hey, wow, can you start Monday? That was it. That was my audition process from then on. And so, you know, some people have been wonderful parts of my life. And I'm so glad that, of course, I printed that letter out and saved it forever from Don. But he said, I am a product of chaos theory. For some reason, the universe decided to be very kind to me and make me the luckiest man on earth. And then he added, and this was Don's sense of humor, he said, and I wish great success to every one of your young voice talents entering this field, which is now harder because people now have home studios and we have ISDN, so you can live anywhere. He was a pioneer of ISDN, of course. And he said, I wish them all the best of luck, ... just as soon as I die. But then he did die. Tragically, he did die of an operator's mistake. In an operation, the doctor nicked his lung, and effusion happened, and his face puffed up. He lost the voice. He said, I think it was on voices.com where he published this. He said, everybody, I want you to know what's happened. And this is the true story. The hospital denies it and will be in litigation forever, he said, but they killed me. He'd been a smoker. Now, you don't get a voice like that without smoking. Yeah. But he'd been a non-smoker for 20 years. Unfortunately, it caught up with him and they had to open his chest. So that's the true Don LaFontaine story. Of course, after that, SAG created the Don LaFontaine Laboratories, Voice Labs, where giants in the voiceover world would teach young people in SAG to work in a real studio and do voice work. And such was the honor that this man brought to the profession as such a decent, wonderful human being. But he would always kid on camera. You know, in one interview, he's asked by the newsman who's from Channel 5 in Des Moines or something, why is it that you get all the work in voiceover? And he said, well, that's because it should be. You know, stuff like that. In reality, when he was interviewed by some young girl reporter, she says, what should I call you? The god of voiceover? He visibly flinched at that term. He said, honey, I'm no god. I'm Don. Call me Don. Because the real Don LaFontaine was a pussycat, a sweetheart, and for all his ferocious, bald-headed looks, you know, with those piercing eyes of his and everything, the man was just as gentle and kind and wonderful as he could be. Imagine writing me, a nobody, a long letter back and saying, I hope you're taking good care of Bob. He's a wonderful friend of the family and all. So it was all true. And how about that I was teaching a guy who knew Don LaFontaine. I should have said, God, go live with him for a few months. You'll learn more than I could ever teach you. But I come from the background of being a producer-director. So I'm the guy people had to come with hat in hand saying, please hire me. And that gave me, I think, a greater knowledge in some ways about how to teach voiceover than having just been a talent competing with my students. And I don't do that. I don't compete with them. By the way, anybody who wants to contact me about anything, I teach long distance. They can contact me on Messenger, Facebook Messenger.
Okay, very good. And your Facebook handle, we'll look at the profile here, is Chuck.McKibben. McKibben spelled McKibben .3. So Chuck.McKibben.3 on Facebook, and he'll get back to you. And
I would too on Philly VO, Philly VO, PHILLY, V as in Victor, O as in Oscar, but it's more for Philadelphia voiceover. I came up with it in the 13 years I was in Philadelphia teaching. And PhillyVO at Comcast.net will also get you in touch with me. I'm a very friendly fellow. I like to talk to people who love this business, and I hope to hear from some folks, honestly, because it's so great to have this internet thingy that allows us to talk so easily and freely about a business we've all loved and wanted to be in from, well, in my case, from age 6, and have just a wonderful time in. There were tough days, but I think a good way to end the conversation is something that you repeated the other day while we talked, which was the worst day in voiceover or radio beats the best day doing anything else for a living. Mm-hmm. So true. So true. I'm a lucky man. I really am. So, any other questions, my friend?
Well, that was a great way to end it. I was like wondering, what should I ask you to end it with? And that is just, that's the cream of the crop right there. We've been talking with Chuck McKibben. He's a voiceover talent, teaches voiceover work to aspiring voiceover talent. And he was in radio, got to work with Mel Blanc, all these great stories here on the Talking Archive. And we thank you for being here with us. This was a great time, and definitely continued success to you. Also, if you know anybody else who wants to interview here, I'd love to send them my way. As
I'm going to drop a line or two to a couple people I can think of. Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
And if you haven't had Randy West here yet, oh my God, he is an encyclopedia of knowledge, of course, about Hollywood history and radio and TV.
Yeah, I'd love to interview Randy if he's interested, definitely.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Randy, when you hear this, and I hope you will, I am so proud of you writing that phenomenal book of yours, and so happy about the 20 plus years that we've been friends. Unfortunately, only via the internet, but isn't that magnificent that you can have a friend who's 3,000 miles away, 3,500 in this case, and never physically meet them, but be the closest of pals, We are kindred souls, by the way. He said that a long time ago. We came up hoping to be very successful DJs, and then he got into the big time as a great game show announcer and so forth. And I had my success. And, for a long time, we wrote long letters to each other. And I treasure those, too. So,
in fact, Randy's book is titled TV Inside Out, Flukes, Flakes, Feuds, and Felonies. Try saying that 10 times fast. Yeah. The backstage blunders, bloopers, and blasphemy of celebrities in search of success. And you can get that on Amazon.com. And your book is titled Mel Blanc, The Voice of Bugs Bunny, ... and me, inside the studio with Hollywood's man of 1,000 voices. It's available both in audiobook form as well as Kindle, also on Amazon.
Right. And Kindle's cheaper.
Yeah,
Kindle. By the way, the Kindle book has audio. It's what they call the textbook format, and I was able to include voice samples there. It's only about $7 or $8, by the way. If you don't want to hear my voice for 5.5 hours, you will hear audio even in the Kindle book.
Oh, okay.
So, I thought I'd mention that. First time I've ever been able to tell the world about that. But thank you so much for the plug. I do appreciate it. But I think it's gotten some 5-star ratings, and I think that in honoring two people in particular, Mel Blanc and the man who introduced me, Rod Tebow, who, was a dear soul, the dearest soul ever. The story is in there about how my mentioning Rod on the internet, on my now defunct website, Voiceover Island, which I took down a couple of years ago. But I mentioned him And a woman contacted me, said, "You don't remember me, but you met me when I was about 5. I'm Rod Tebow's daughter. And
Wow.
my name is Darlene." And she said, "You reunited a rather dysfunctional family because no children in our family believed that he'd been a big shot in Hollywood." And she said, "I searched and searched to find any mention of his name because he did know everyone in Hollywood and they loved him dearly. But nobody talked about him until you had a mention of him on your website and talked about how wonderful he was." Then his grandchildren, his 2 boy grandchildren, believed that this man, who was so kind and gentle, but apparently dysfunctional in a way, had been a big shot at Hollywood and Vine, a giant in his own field. Wow. He was part of one of the very first satellites called the Echo satellite. It bounced signals off of it. He helped design that for NASA.
Wow.
So when he told me that he built his own mixing console, well, I didn't believe him then, but now I certainly do. And I like to honor his memory, Mel's memory, and although he's not passed away, thankfully, I also want to give a big thank you, if he ever hears this, to Noel Blank, whose friendship and guidance and willingness to hire a green kid in a very important position really permanently changed my life for the better for every single day that followed it, including today when I have students because of the Mel Blanc connection, because they say, "Hey, you got a Wikipedia listing. You worked with Mel Blanc and I could actually study with you?" Yeah, I'm 77 and I've only gotten better. I've only got more knowledge than I used to have. So yeah, and I love my students. I love socializing with them. We get to be friends. And now I've met another friend. His name is Josh, and I'm so proud.
Well, thank
Very
you.
proud.
I appreciate that very much, Chuck. And yeah, look forward to keeping in contact. And
Yes, please.
yeah,
Please do.
definitely. And once again, we've been talking with voiceover talent and teacher Chuck McKibben, and he's also the author of the book Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny, ... and me, inside the studio with Hollywood's man of 1,000 voices. And until next time, this is Josh Jacobs. Keep your mind on the things above, and as you hit that open road, don't be a slowdown spectator.